Hey everybody, this is the first in a series of 3 videos on the Pikmin series, so obviously we're taking a look at the first game today. I'll be discussing everything about the game's mechanics and objectives and even the 2 seconds of story it has to offer. As it's a go-to for me, obviously it comes highly recommended, so if you want to avoid spoilers, you should probably play the game for yourself first. Pikmin was released for the GameCube in 2001 as Nintendo's attempt at a real-time strategy game. Having evolved from a project that took elements from the Super Mario 128 tech demo titled Adam and Eve, it eventually changed into its current form after the team got a group of characters to carry something together. It's also a notable piece of history as one of Shigeru Miyamoto's last pet projects, as he stepped away from being the main director and producer of the Mario and Zelda series after the N64 era, leaving them in other hands. At the time of this game's release, he even said, and I quote, "The next Mario is Pikmin." Now that's obviously not true because Pikmin is niche as flip, which will also be the quote on my gravestone. It still holds a special place in many hardcore Nintendo fans' hearts, including my own though. However, I didn't play it until a couple of years ago, where I picked up the Wii port at a random GameStop. I have the crappy artless cover, which super peeves me off, because Pikmin turned out to be the most impressive game I'd ever played at the time. And over 2 years and a bajillion new games later, it stayed consistently high up there. Now, I started using the Izzy-Doodle branding about 3 years ago, which feels wild to say. I don't usually stick with projects this long. My writing, drawing, animation, and editing skills have improved, maybe exponentially. I don't know if it's quantifiable, but I think they've gotten better, which is what matters most. But since I've gotten better, I think this is a good chance to pay an even better tribute to one of my favorite games and one of my fave series as a whole. It's time for a Pikmin Redo long-form review. Pikmin's story is very simple and is successfully kicked off with a single movie. Captain Olimar's ship, the SS Dolphin, gets bonked on its soft spot by a space rock and breaks into 30 parts, which fall onto the planet below, along with the captain himself. After waking up at the impact site, he further explains that this alien world has poisonous oxygen in its atmosphere, and he's only got 30 in-game days before he keels over. Dang. After shuffling around for a bit, he'll discover the first onion, meet the red Pikmin, one of 3 types he can use in this adventure, and say hundreds of words trying to explain this new gameplay style to the player. You'll collect your first few pellets and pluck some more Pikmin, which allows you to make them push this box as a team, and with a bit more harvesting, you can get the engine back to the Dolphin, meaning you can leave the planet's surface and go to explore other areas. I'm a bit torn on how to critique this. I think the simplest way to explain how I feel about this tutorial is that I think it's really good at teaching the basic actions the player can do, but I have a couple nitpicks. It's structured to show you how to use Pikmin to make more Pikmin and to get them to perform basic tasks, and it does so in a not very overwhelming way. That's dope, and I think it does a good job of what it sets out to do. However, I have 2 thoughts on how to make it slightly even better. As the game is now, the huge bar at the top of the screen showing how much of the day is left doesn't show up or get explained until day 2. I think it would be possible to, not to introduce the time limit, but to introduce the idea of time passing on the first day. That way Olimar could quickly remark on the actual passage of time on the second day, and on the first, discuss the passage of time as a general aesthetic concept, like it becomes afternoon once you have 10 Pikmin, and becomes evening once you're carrying the engine, or something like that. It would introduce the idea before actually ramping it up the next day, so the player would have it on their minds before just being presented with it point blank. Olimar's really freaking chatty during this whole tutorial, so they could have fit it in somewhere. That's the other thing. Olimar does all this talking, over-explaining the camera controls, and not explaining how to best use swarming at all? Listen, the camera controls are not that important besides centering the camera. I literally barely ever change the viewpoint on purpose. I usually accidentally do it when I'm trying to swarm, ironically. The player should know about centering the camera, but they absolutely need to be properly taught about swarming, so make the camera angles an optional journal. And maybe the devs thought about it already and came to the conclusion about all this and changed it after trying to implement what I just talked about. And like I said, as far as teaching you how to use the Pikmin for harvesting, moving obstacles, and carrying things, this is a fantastic lesson session. But those are just my thoughts on how to make it that much more effective. At any rate, the main parts of this game's gameplay are made clear on this first day. Olimar's controls and the Pikmin are what's right in your face, but the basics of the big open levels are also shown off, and the day system could have been handled better, but it's at least teased by the big end of day fanfare. But the aesthetic things matter too. The art style, graphics, music, writing, it's all super important to Pikmin's brilliance. So let's dive in then. What's Pikmin all about? Before I talk about Olimar's actions and how they feel to do and everything, let's talk about the controller. Pikmin was originally released on the GameCube. However, it was later re-released on the Wii as part of the new Play Control line of games. I know, how wacky is that? But the thing is, the Wii Remote is perfect for Pikmin. I can't speak from any real experience actually playing the GameCube version, but in my opinion, having more direct control over the game you're playing is usually better than having less. And the Wii controls allow you to do just that by assigning this little circle thing to the Wiimote's IR pointer, meaning you can move Olimar and swarm your Pikmin at the same time, or throw the Pikmin to a more specific position. It does cause some teeny tiny inconveniences, as the pointer will slightly jiggle as you move the controller on accident while mashing the A button, but other than that, this setup works great. Now onto Olimar. Olimar is an interesting piece to this game's puzzle because he serves as the stand-in for the classic, iconic RTS cursor. Most real-time strategy games have a god pointer stand in for you as you click to micromanage your units. In Pikmin, Olimar has a pointer cursor ringy thingy attached to him, but he's a character in the world. He can take damage from enemies, he has to physically move around obstacles, and you have to take real time to cross the stages between groups of Pikmin. But what's of main importance is how he interacts with the Pikmin. So here's the lowdown. Your plant platoon follows you around, so Olimar can toss them to get them to interact with things by where they land. To get them to follow you again, you can whistle them back to your side from a distance. You can dismiss them to sort specific types or get any stragglers to work on something. And you can use that swarm ability I've mentioned like 80 million times to lead the entire group and get them around or on top of something. While near an onion, you can put Pikmin back inside or pull more out and pluck recently sprouted ones from the ground. This is a solid list of moves and they all feel good to perform, and it balances things out to make Olimar as useful as possible without making the Pikmin feel like a gimmick. There are some tricks the game doesn't tell you about though. First of all, in most cases, Olimar taking damage means almost nothing. Unless you get set on fire a few times, you can literally survive the worst this planet's wildlife has or have to offer. I have no idea which tense to use in that sentence. When you don't have any Pikmin, you can also use the throw move as a weak attack. Now, it's very unlikely Olimar throwing hands is going to kill anything, but you can use this to get enemies to focus on you instead of chasing your working Pikmin, so some of these parts are a real team effort. Olimar's actions are well placed on the controller as well. The throw, whistle, and dismissal are mapped to A, B, and C respectively. Swarming is bound to the down arrow on the D-pad, and like I said, the pointer is the pointer, and vice versa. I am killing it with the wordplay today. But there are some issues with the controls, namely with the camera views. Pressing Z to center the camera works fine. I mean, it's centering the camera. But the game also has various zoom levels and tries to make use of both top-down and 3/4 perspectives, which are put on the other 3 arrows on the D-pad. And with how small that thing is compared to the average Drooman thumb, you will find yourself accidentally hitting those arrows, well, not all the time, but enough to make a note of it and write a paragraph on it in, say, like a YouTube review or something. Maybe with like a run-on sentence in the script so you can show multiple instances of this happening. Yeah, that sounds about right. Overall, the controls are excellent though, and highlight an interesting take on the player's role in an RTS. The Pikmin really are at the heart of everything. The game's named after them, so they're obviously the entire point of the gameplay. You control a squadron of up to 100 of the little guys and get them to carry, fight, multiply, maybe accidentally get eaten, destroy, build, destroy, climb to new locations. Yeah, you get the point. They can do a lot of different things. But the most important things all of them can do are carrying things back to base, sucking at fighting, and getting hands-on with other types of objects in the environment. Carrying is by far the most common thing you'll have them do. After grabbing something, a Pikmin will head back to wherever that something belongs. This is important for harvesting and for recovering ship parts. When it comes to ship parts, it's easy. They just all make a beeline back to the ship. Boom, thing gotten, progress made. When it comes to harvesting, you can either use the pellets from flowers or dead enemies to produce more Pikmin seeds. Just one of the many reasons this game is low-key metal. It gets a bit more complicated as the game quickly introduces color and weight into the mix. Essentially, an item's weight is the minimum amount of Pikmin needed to carry something. For example, a dwarf Bulborb has a weight of 3, so you need 3 Pikmin to carry it back. But which onion will it go to? Well, that's where color comes in, as the color majority of the Pikmin carrying it determines where it will go to. Using the same example, if 3 yellow Pikmin grab that same dwarf Bulborb corpse, it will go to the yellow onion. However, if 2 blue Pikmin and 1 red Pikmin all carry it together, it would go to the blue onion because they're the majority. These are all intuitive concepts, it just might take you a little bit of experimentation to get the hang of it. With some more minor experimentation, you'll learn that you can add a bunch more carriers to make them go faster. What's that? You want to make them go even faster? Well, let's rip some fat grass, or whatever the kids say these days. I quit paying attention to slang after the dab happened. In the grass is this nectar stuff, which will transform the Pikmin from leaves into flowers, making them faster and stronger. While you can only have up to 100 out of the onion at any given time, which is fine, because any more would make the game way too easy and probably laggy. The game is understanding and increases the Pikmin inside the onions even when there's too many outside. That means you have plenty of ways to grow your army, which is good if you're great at building up a surplus or if you goofed up and need to quickly recover some troops, or both, like me. I also saw this goofy glitch where the counters signifying your Pikmin totals got misaligned, so let's all take a moment to laugh at the video game. Ready? Alright, 3, 2, 1. Do this. Alright, thanks for following along at home. These troops are just alright at fighting, which seems unfortunate, but it's actually pretty interesting because it means combat in Pikmin is about fighting smarter, not harder. You can bonk the dwarf Bulborbs on the head to instantly kill them by bashing their brains in. You can easily beat bigger Bulborbs by sneaking up on them from behind and swarming them, except for when that doesn't work for some reason. You can get around enemies by distracting them with Olimar's weaker attacks, you know, that kind of thing. Having as many Pikmin as possible will make fights easier, but not always cakewalks. And while getting caught in a pinch can remind you you're on the bottom of the food chain here, putting in the effort to think and observe for a bit before rushing in can help you gain the upper hand. I will say this doesn't always feel like a balanced dynamic. When I returned to the Forest of Hope after getting the blue Pikmin from the Forest Navel, the Bulborbs were way tougher to kill, which felt kind of cool because it was like the game was getting harder as I went along. But then when I went to the Distant Spring, the Bulbears were so easy to KO, so I'm really baffled if this was intentional or not. I mean, it's definitely not as intentional feeling as the other flaws this game has, but we'll get there in a sec. The other actions the Pikmin can perform are stuff like tearing down walls, building bridges and stick ladders, pushing a couple boxes, busting open geysers, that kind of thing. These things may sound boring because you're not doing them like in most games, so it seems at first you just have to stand there and watch your thembos work. But it doesn't take more than 2 brain cells to realize you can make different groups of Pikmin do different tasks in different places at the same time. This is where the different color types make their distinctions the most clear. Red Pikmin are the strongest fighters and are resistant to fire, so you can have them do most of the fighting or carry stuff out of areas bursting with flames. Yellow Pikmin can carry bomb rocks and be tossed higher than the others, so you can use them to nab things out of reach, bomb groups of enemies, and break concrete walls. The blue Pikmin can breathe underwater, so you can take them into huge chunks of the map that the other Pikmin would throw a hissy fit about. So as you can see, there's a lot of layers to Pikmin, even at its most basic levels. However, it never feels as overwhelming as all my words probably just made it sound. Using Olimar to get different groups of Pikmin to accomplish multiple goals by making use of their numbers and powers is all it is, which is a unique and solid premise. If I had to sum it up, I'd say Pikmin's gameplay is all about symbiosis, which ties into the game's greater focus on nature. Olimar is a smart but weak dude all alone, commanding 100 powerful morons. Even if you don't really get everything at first, you can scrape by understanding that idea. The only real obstacle to the total success of this formula is the Pikmin themselves. This is where the game starts to show its infantile nature. The first time making a game like this is going to have the most slip-ups. And the biggest slip-up of many is the Pikmin's dumbest plants AI. They're programmed to randomly trip at times, and since they'll also get snagged on corners or walls, that means you need to stop and wait for them to catch up. Speaking of which, the leaf Pikmin are so slow and lag behind so much, you'll constantly be waiting for them to regroup. And in this game, the Pikmin also tend to spread out for some reason. Not only is that annoying because they have to be physically right next to you to be thrown, which slows you down, it also means whenever they get blown around or set on fire, it can be close to impossible to whistle them back, which means a lot of Pikmin deaths. Not that they listen to you anyway, sometimes it takes multiple whistles to get them to pay attention to you at all. Yuck! All of these things will really build up over the course of a typical playthrough, and I don't think that it's that this game is really aged. GameCube games don't really age in the gameplay department. It's very polished for what it is. If it wasn't, this wouldn't be a game I'd want to revisit ever in my life. But the moment-to-moment gameplay has a lot of things to focus on improving in future entries. Once you get to grips with the unique gameplay, you'll probably start paying a little more attention to the game's main themes. When you think about nature, it's easy to only think of some pretty flowers, some grass blowing in the wind, or how relaxing it is to watch rain patter down. But the truth is, there are tons of animals out there, and even though they don't understand why they're doing things like hunting for prey, or flopping down and taking a nap in the middle of the day, they're out there following their instincts, they're surviving. And in a word, that is nature. And Pikmin is a game all about nature, all about that serenity and the harshness, kind of a yin-yang sort of deal, and it really shines through in all the game's presentation. Each of the game's areas are made to be as photorealistic as the GameCube could handle. Sure, the textures are old and the geometry is more jagged than it would be in actual outside land, but it still sells a world that feels natural. This is helped by the use of very subdued, dare I say, earthy colors. Grass and leaves are darker greens, the dirt is a very dry tan, and even the water has a pale, barely blue hue. Objects you can interact with, like the bridges, walls, and cans, use far more striking but still real feeling colors to draw you in. All of this helps sell the world as a real place, and the presence of weird stuff like the giant cans, cardboard boxes, rusty metal structures, and a giant bottle guide the player towards realizing this place is Earth? We don't know about the true state of it quite yet. We have to wait a little bit more to figure that one out. But the great thing about the backgrounds being as realistic as they can be is that this helps you focus on the gameplay by drawing attention to the candy-colored characters dotting the landscapes. Every living thing in this game uses bright palettes that catch your eye as soon as you look at them. This is most obvious with the Pikmin themselves as they're just primary colors, but even when you have 100 of them, they manage to stick out. Each of the other creatures do this as well, which I really love. The character design as a whole just never misses in this game. Sure, each of the animals look cartoony and alien, but they also have believable anatomy, and their difficulty can also be determined by their size and design. It creates a believable ecosystem. They all also have unique behaviors that further immerse you into the world. Bulborbs and Bulbears sleep and allow you to sneak up on them. The fiery and puffy blowhogs will either set your guys on fire or blow them around. And Wollywogs will belly flop to try and crush the Pikmin. There are several boss enemies, but they're usually not placed in arenas, or they're not made a big deal of. They just kind of show up and you have to be the fittest to survive. Naturally, I wiped the floor with all of them this time. But the point is, they feel like animals just being at the top of their food chains. They all have great sound design too, from the Pikmin's various little noises as they work to all the enemies. My favorite part of this game is after you get the good ending and you get to watch this freaking sick FMV where each of the creatures are directly given names and described in a biological manner. It also just really cracks me up how the person playing in the footage had to actively get the Pikmin tortured to show off what these creatures can do. This juxtapositional tone of hope overcoming bleak circumstances can be seen, or read I guess, in all the monologues from Olimar. He always gives little blurbs whenever you find a new part describing its use or something about his life relating to it. He also gives little journal entries at the end of each day. The journals sometimes give hints and tips, but sometimes Olimar just straight up bears his little heart and talks about how he's freaked out by watching some of the Pikmin die that day, or how much he misses his wife and kids. You can hear similar things when grabbing parts. It's hard to believe that this guy, out of anybody, is one of the most developed Nintendo characters of all time. There's a great balance here. Olimar feels like his situation is always looking up, and that he'll live to go home again, but he's always aware that he's in a situation where he needs to stay vigilant and figure out how to survive. And like I said, that balance is part of the entirety of this whole game. The world is full of beautiful imagery and cute characters and fun gameplay, but enemies can swallow your Pikmin whole, killing them, or you can kill them and turn their corpse into new seeds. You could be having a chill time, then the looming threat of sundown slaps you in the face. If you leave any stray Pikmin behind, they're chased and eaten by nocturnal predators. If Olimar dies or a color of Pikmin goes extinct, that progress is gone. Whoops. That's nature. Despite the scary parts though, the beauty of this world is always at the forefront, and the music is a great reminder of that. The music in this game was composed by Hajime Wakai, who would end up having a very established pedigree at Nintendo, working as one of the main co-composers of various Zelda titles, and even becoming a sound director for that series and Pikmin. To me, he has a distinctly whimsical style and really knows how to pick good instruments that fit the scene, which is very evident here. Pikmin has a very bouncy soundtrack that balances the weirdness with the wonder of this world, as can be heard in the theme for the Impact site, which really sells Olimar's curiosity even in the face of deadly slim survival odds. I think my favorite thing that Wakai pulled off in this soundtrack is a heavy use of dynamic tracks. Each stage has its main track, and a second variation for when you're near working Pikmin or when you're fighting enemies. On top of that, Wakai also made a whole second version of the song for when evening approaches. How cool is that? I like the working track for the Forest of Hope and the evening version of the Forest Navel the very best. There's also several other jingles that I really enjoy that reward you for making tiny bits of progress, and make your little successes that much more palpable. After doing your best and getting a good haul, that last one is literally my favorite thing to hear. With such a dense set of main action-based mechanics to get to grips with, the obvious question is, how do the designers put those to the test? They do so in two major ways. There are obviously the main stages, which are fascinatingly designed to squish together multiple design philosophies. But before we dive into that, I want to talk about the day system, which I find equally as interesting. As we explained in the tutorial day, we have 30 in-game days before Olimar kicks the comically oversized bucket. And with the addition of the timer at the top of the screen during each day spent exploring, you're given about 13 minutes to do whatever you want in whichever stage you landed in for the day. So if we do some quick math, the maximum time you have to beat this game is 390 total minutes, or 6.5 hours. So that's not a very long game, but that number will continually get smaller when some microcosmic factors come into play. Since there are 30 ship parts and 30 days, your starting plan will probably be to nab one ship part per day. Not a bad idea while you're still getting into the swing of things, but that plan will definitely change pretty fast for a few reasons. Carrying parts and doing tasks takes time and resources, and fighting enemies that are in the way will potentially cost you time and the lives of your soldiers. All of these struggles may take you a while to overcome, but the maps are only moderately sized, so it's not going to take you 13 whole minutes for most of these parts on their own, aside for maybe the ones that are inside enemies. Obviously, the most logical new plan, whether you're struggling or have some extra time on your hands then, is to try and scout out multiple parts each day. Once you get the whimsical radar, you'll see how tightly packed a lot of the parts actually are, along with other various geographical features. This should crank your brain gears into 5th gear as you end up trying to efficiently manage multiple groups of Pikmin to get as many parts as you can in a single day. That's what's so great about this game. I mean, mostly everything is, but its short length combined with this drive to get faster and faster keeps me coming back again and again. This review's footage is my 4th playthrough, and as we can see from the endgame tally, I've been slowly whittling down my time on the planet. My first run took me 22 days, so I worked it down to 18, 16, and then 15. Evidently, I wasn't very careful this time though, and I lost a lot of guys this time. Every playthrough is a chance to be that much more efficient, and I will never get sick of it. The biggest change from the GameCube version, other than the controls, is the addition of being able to return to any previous day to redo it. Honestly, I think that's a great addition, and I haven't seen anybody really argue against it. Sure, it takes away from the tough luck nature of the game, like 0.0001%, but it's a great accessibility change that makes the game less demanding, and it feels like at least part of the game wants you to survive to the end. Pikmin's level design is an interesting mashup of early 3D Mario and early 3D Zelda's concepts. It borrows the idea of having multiple major collectibles spread around each stage from Super Mario 64. However, unlike that game, you are going to be doing absolutely zero platforming. You are going to be putting your big brain to work and accomplishing each of these objectives, making each level feel like a big Zelda dungeon. These stages don't have definitive beginnings and ends though. The ship parts are all self-contained and pretty well separated, so as we can see, Pikmin meets up somewhere in the middle, Venn diagrammically speaking. Each of the game's 5 areas are all unique, iconic, challenging, and most importantly, fun. So let's rip them open one by one and see what makes them tick. The impact site is the area we explored on the first tutorial day. However, you can return once you have all 3 types of Pikmin to grab another part from the munching clam. I think the most notable thing about this area is the abundance of pellets, especially ones that create huge amounts of seeds, like holy crap. This place was clearly created to be a safe space for you to build up your army, which is a great way to get players to revisit this place after day 1, besides just nabbing another part. The Forest of Hope is arguably this game's most iconic locale and the first fully fleshed out level. It starts a trend of these larger areas placing you in the center, allowing you to head whichever direction you want once you get going. When you first land, pretty much every path is blocked off by walls. You'll only be able to break down these wooden walls at first, but once you unlock the yellow Pikmin, you'll be able to fully open up the level and explore to your heart's content. Most of the enemies here are bulborbs, which aren't really a threat with a big enough army. The burrowing Snagrit, the game's words not mine, is by far one of the game's most challenging fights, with it popping out of the ground to peck at you. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little bit terrified by it, but it has a really unique design and a unique tactic to beating it, which is great. The Forest Navel is a dark hole full of even tougher predators. A lot of players seem to think this is the best area in the game, and I agree. Your Pikmin's skills will all be put to the test here. The yellow's high tosses and bomb carrying, the red's resistance to fire honestly makes them the MVP of this area, and you'll find the blue Pikmin in this area too. Their ability to explore underwater really comes in handy here. There's a part that puts all of these skills to use. You'll need to get the blue Pikmin to activate a geyser to propel Olimar, toss the yellow Pikmin up high to grab the part, and then use the reds to carry the part back to base without getting lit up. The beady longlegs fight is also here, but my favorite part is the Puffstool fight, since his spores can transform your little guys into dangerous mushroom zombies. I also like the thieving breadbug, which you can do a tug of war with to take him out. Overall, the Forest Navel is a well-crafted level that well balances required use of all your skills and has a creepy atmosphere that is only enhanced by the increased difficulty. The distant spring is where the blue Pikmin really get their time to shine, because more than half of this freaking map is covered in water. The place is swarming with super powerful predators too. Oh, and it has a third of all the ship parts. Yeah, 10 out of 30. So despite how daunting it is, you better get to work, little buddy. Even though the blues are the real heroes here, the red Pikmin will be a huge help in combat against a lot of the crazy hard guys, and the yellows can help bust down walls as usual. This level also has some puzzles that are still basic. I mean, this is a game about planning, not solving after all, but they do take some more thought compared to the other parts. I like the one that uses the otherwise optional Candy Pop Buds to switch Pikmin types in the middle of the level in order to get it. Not to mention our special friend, the Smoky Prog. This dusty creature is only able to be seen if you get to the distant spring before day 15, and they will literally melt your Pikmin into ghosts. They're bar none the hardest creature to take head on. The final trial is Olimar's final trial. His words, not mine. This is the definitive end of the game. It only has one part, and you can only travel here once you have all 29 other parts. This level is just a straight path full of micro puzzles that put all your Pikmin to use one last time before you fight the King Bullblacks as a final boss. They can be made a pushover by having a yellow Pikmin die for the cause, but they're a tough foe regardless because of their wide-ranged attacks and surprisingly swift enactment of said attacks. Once you beat him, you can carry the piggy bank back and book it out of there. The end. Remember X minutes ago when I said each of the game's 5 areas are all unique, iconic, challenging, and most importantly fun? Well, that's what I just talked about, so this is the end of the section. Oh, before I forget, I need to devote some time to the game's extra little single-player mode, Challenge Mode it's called. Your goal here is to grow as many Pikmin as possible within a single in-game day, which can be tried as many times as you want. Your scores will be ranked by the game, you can do all the 5 main areas, and this is so boring. You can't even earn anything for getting a high score. There's no reason to play this more than once for the sake of curiosity. So while it's certainly like an idea for a little something extra to do with Pikmin, it really doesn't amount to anything, making it by default the worst part of this game. It is a side mode though, so it doesn't subtract anything from the main game at all. Like I said way earlier, this game has multiple endings. It's actually the only game in the series to do so in such a big way, and as you might guess, which ending cutscene you get to watch is determined by how many parts you get. If you goof up and get barely any by the end of day 30, Olimar dies and gets turned into a hybrid Pikmin sprout. Gosh, that's morbid. Throughout the game, Olimar keeps suggesting you probably don't need every part to take off, so in another more basic ending, Olimar just ditches the Pikmin and leaves, which is dumb and sad and feels very out of character for him. The best ending is similar, but it's after you collect all 30 parts whenever you get them. So Olimar says goodbye and then takes off. It seems like the Pikmin are learning how to take care of themselves better though. Maybe they won't stay on the bottom of the food chain now. As Olimar takes off for planet Hocotate, finally able to see his family again, we see a ton of different onions trying to follow after him, some of which haven't even appeared in any games so far. It's a triumphant ending that teases that there's more to this world, but it still feels like a perfect, happy little ending. The bad ending is worth seeing because of how silly it is, but the best ending is the best because it gives the player something to aspire to, and it feels the most rewarding to achieve. This game is so close to perfection, and that's why it stayed one of my favorites over the last few years. I hope my over-thoroughness has shown how every single bit of the design fits together like a Pikmin-themed puzzle. Olimar's skills are balanced to make the Pikmin useful, and all the Pikmin types are well distinguished. Each of the levels are made to have an open structure that well separates each of the objectives. The day system gives you a time limit that's long enough to encourage you to multitask, but short enough to create excellent tension. The world is beautiful and cute, but like in real life, there are scary things that are just trying to live their lives. Its efficiency-driven gameplay means that you can play it over and over again and try to do better next time, and that's worked on me. Yeah, it's not perfect. The Pikmin's AI isn't the smartest, the camera controls lead to a bit of frustration, and the challenge mode is the most tacked on thing ever. But I love this game's weird tone, its gorgeous world, its threatening enemies, and that's why I critique it. I'm in love with it. Pikmin 1 is a great first attempt at a new type of game, and even with all its stumblings, its structure is enough to make it a worthwhile experience. It may be niche as flip, but it's my niche. If you watch this whole video without having played Pikmin yet, I can totally recommend it. But if it hasn't struck your fancy, stick around maybe. We might find your niche at some point on this journey. Join me next time where we turn right back around and return to where we almost died for the sake of capitalism in Pikmin 2. I hope I'll see you seeing me.